Picture this: Sir Keir Starmer, the newly minted Prime Minister, stands shoulder to shoulder with world leaders at the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. The cameras flash as he speaks of forging stronger trade ties with India, opening pragmatic dialogue with President Xi Jinping of China, and doubling down on support for Ukraine as its devastating war passes its 1,000th day. On the surface, it's the image of a statesman in control, steering Britain toward a future of global prominence. But while Starmer shakes hands under Brazil's sunny skies, a storm brews back home, a storm of protests, betrayals and fury that could shatter his premiership. Back in Westminster, the anger is palpable. Tractors rumble through the streets as 13,000 furious farmers and protesters swarm the capital, decrying Starmer's controversial decision to overhaul inheritance tax. It's a policy targeting landowning couples with estates worth over £3 million, and for many farmers, it feels like a death knell for their generational livelihoods. What makes this outrage even more potent is the sense of betrayal. These changes weren't flagged during the election campaign. Instead, voters now find themselves blindsided by a government they trusted. Ruth Davidson has dubbed it political dynamite, and Labour's electoral opponents are already sharpening their knives, ready to exploit the chaos. For his part, Starmer remains steadfast. When pressed during the G20 summit, he defended the inheritance tax overhaul as a necessary step to fill what he calls the £22 billion Conservative black hole. His framing is clear: Britain's wealthiest must shoulder the burden to stabilise the economy and fix public services. "I'm asking those with the broadest shoulders to contribute more," he said, yet his reasoning falls flat for the farmers parked outside Parliament. To them, this isn't about fixing the economy, it's about dismantling their way of life. And it's not just farmers feeling betrayed. Retailers are warning of massive layoffs as a result of Starmer's decision to lift employers' national insurance contributions. Pensioners, meanwhile, are grappling with the devastating implications of means testing the winter fuel allowance. According to the government's own impact assessment, an additional 100,000 pensioners could fall into poverty by 2027. It's a sobering reality that has left critics accusing Starmer of abandoning Labour's core mission to protect the most vulnerable. Adding to the sense of betrayal is the economic slowdown under Starmer's watch. In the first 3 months of his premiership, growth has slowed dramatically. By September, the economy was in contraction, a far cry from the optimistic promises of prosperity that propelled Starmer into number. Critics argue that Starmer's global focus is coming at the expense of addressing domestic crises, and the backlash is only growing louder. Meanwhile, Parliament is consumed by its own fiery debate. Labour MP Kim Leadbeater's assisted dying bill has sparked a ferocious divide among MPs and the public. Disability campaigner George Fielding has been one of the bill's most vocal critics, describing it as dark and dangerous. Fielding's warnings are blunt and harrowing. This isn't about compassion. This is about legislating pain. For Fielding, the broken state of Britain's NHS and social care systems makes this legislation unworkable, unsafe, and a moral failure. "We're asking doctors to cross ethical lines," he said, pointing to the bill's lack of protections for conscientious objectors. The legislation, he argues, risks creating a two-tier healthcare system and undermining the very foundations of medical ethics. The debate over assisted dying has become a flashpoint, highlighting broader dissatisfaction with Labour's priorities. While supporters of the bill argue that it offers dignity and choice to those suffering terminal illnesses, critics see it as a dangerous distraction from the urgent need to fix Britain's crumbling palliative care system. Fielding's damning assessment resonates with many. Before we talk about assisted dying, we need to talk about assisting the living. As if the protests and parliamentary firestorms weren't enough, Labour found itself embroiled in yet another scandal, this time involving Belfast rap group Kneecap. Known for their politically charged, provocative lyrics, Kneecap sued the government after Kemi Badenoch, during her time as a minister, blocked their arts grant. Labour's decision not to contest the case has ignited a political firestorm. Badenoch, now the Conservative leader, wasted no time lambasting Starmer's administration as cowardly. Labour will always capitulate rather than defend UK interests, she declared, adding fuel to an already raging fire. For Labour, the optics of the kneecap settlement couldn't be worse. The rap group's victory has been celebrated in some circles. They've pledged to donate their £14,250 settlement to youth organisations promoting cross-community dialogue. But critics see the case as emblematic of Labour's inability to stand firm on matters of principle. Badenoch's scathing remarks about Labour's decision have only amplified the sense that the government is stumbling from one crisis to the next. As these scandals unfold, Starmer clings to his vision of global diplomacy as Britain's salvation. At the G20 summit, he proudly outlined his plans to reignite trade negotiations with India, develop advanced fighter jets in partnership with Japan and Italy, and attract inward investment to boost the economy. He insists these efforts are about delivering for working people. But for many, Starmer's words ring hollow. The disconnect between his lofty global ambitions and the harsh domestic realities is impossible to ignore. Farmers feel abandoned, pensioners feel betrayed, retailers feel unheard. Starmer's defenders argue that his focus on global affairs is a long-term strategy to ensure Britain's prosperity. But his critics see a Prime Minister out of touch with the struggles of ordinary Britons. The protests outside Westminster, the fiery debates in Parliament, and the mounting public discontent paint a damning picture. Starmer's insistence on making tough decisions may resonate with political insiders, but for those bearing the brunt of these policies, it feels like a betrayal of the very values Labour claims to represent. The tension between Starmer's international vision and his domestic challenges underscores the precariousness of his position. On the world stage, he appears strong, pragmatic, and forward-thinking. At home, he's increasingly seen as a leader overwhelmed by crises of his own making. The farmers' revolt, the pensioners' plight, the outrage over the assisted dying bill, and the scandal surrounding kneecap all point to a government struggling to balance its priorities. As Starmer returned from the G20 summit, he faced a Britain more divided than ever. The noise from Westminster protests and the fiery criticism in the media aren't going away. For a Prime Minister who prides himself on being a champion for working people, the stakes couldn't be higher. Will Starmer find a way to bridge the gap between his global ambitions and the domestic chaos threatening to derail his government? Or will his premiership crumble under the weight of mounting scandals and public discontent? One thing is certain, the drama is far from over. Britain is watching, and the noise at home is only growing louder. Every tractor parked outside Parliament, every pensioner turned away from warmth this winter, and every MP divided over Labour's priorities adds to the pressure. Starmer's challenge is clear: deliver on his promises, or risk being remembered as a Prime Minister who lost his people while chasing the world. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.